Back in the day, before streaming, before CDs, we listened to music on albums. A vinyl disc spinning 33 1/3 revolutions per minute brought us great music one side at a time. 20 or so minutes of music, 4 or 5 songs usually, that created a single listening experience. This format exposed us to other songs of the artist, not just the hits, and often flowed in an order that was created to build and maintain or mold a musical experience for the listener.
Sideshow brings musical experiences from the past to life today. Here, we discuss and review individual sides of record albums we have grown to appreciate and hope you will too. Welcome to The Sideshow. All right, so Mark, we are starting with you today.
Thanks, Mike. I have been looking forward to talking about this side for some time. Today we're going to look at Supertramp's Crime of the Century, Side 1. To start with, I've got to acknowledge that Supertramp is not a band for all occasions. While most of their songs are quirky and whimsical, there's a steady melancholy that lurks beneath every Supertramp track, even those you would consider more upbeat. You never want to play Supertramp at a party. Not because it's not good music, not because people don't enjoy the music. There's just a tone that comes with it. There's a time and a place for Supertramp. So with that, people would say, well, why do you want to listen to it in the first place? Well, in my opinion, when I look at music and learn to appreciate music, I feel that it's very important that good music connects with human emotion. Either an emotional mood you're in at the moment, or one that you can pull up from the past. Actually, the music does the pulling, bringing you into connection with a previous time, a previous sense or feeling. Supertramp does this really well. What they did not do very well was jump off to an early commercial success. The first 2 albums, the self-titled debut and their follow-up, Indelibly Stamped, struggled for any attention. These commercial failures led to some shuffling of band members and a creative retreat to a 17th century farm in the West Dorset English countryside. The result was the band's 3rd album, Crime of the Century. Now, as a side note, it would be a great topic for future conversations about all the albums that have been birthed in old English countryside estates. We'd be talking Led Zeppelin, Queen, and notable others, but that's a conversation for another day. It worked for them, and it worked for Supertramp in this case. Released in September of 1974, Crime of the Century began the group's first run of critical and commercial success, hitting number 4 in Britain and in Canada, and number 38 in the United States. Now, although all Supertramp songs would continue to be officially credited as written by Rick Davies and Roger Hodgson, most of them were written individually, similar to a Lennon and McCartney type arrangement. Let's take a look at the album. It's a memorable album cover. We see the hands clutching the bars in an almost infinite prison that floats in space. This was the first work of photographer Paul Wakefield, and he saw it as a resignation to fate when he was looking at this album after listening to the songs and determining a theme for the album itself. Simple but very cool concept. The back of the album has, interestingly enough, naked members of the band clutching their tuxedos looking off into space. On the inside the album, we have on the sleeve the lyrics of all of the songs and a final photograph of those band's tuxedos, now the band members absent as they float off into space. Possibly they all have found themselves in the jail floating off into infinity. I have to say that one of the things that I really missed as we moved away from albums into CDs and now obviously into streaming was the ability to have the album and really be able to inspect things such as the lyrics of all the songs. and read the other liner notes, which would sometimes give information about the album, the band, or the songs themselves. And the artwork was also allowed to be much more elaborate in the larger format that album sleeves provided. And then you have the feel of the album itself on your fingertips. You can feel where the ring of the album has taken shape, and the cardboard itself starts to get a little bit softer as you've owned it and used it more regularly. This cardboard comes to life. It's kind of absorbed everything that has happened to you. You know, the smoke and food around these things are all now part of the albums itself. The fresh air, the nice smells and the bad, the old dirty laundry, and the flowers in the corner. They're all now a part of this album for all the time that we've owned it. I've purchased this album in the 1980s. The album itself on the inside is still in very good condition, and sometimes it really drives me nuts. I collect albums, and I really wonder how people can destroy so rapidly the albums that they have owned. So I'm thankful that this album is still in pretty good shape, and I enjoy listening to it to this day. Also on the back we see To Sam, which is a nod to a Dutch millionaire who supported the band financially from the late 60s to the early 70s. And considering some of the struggles that they had with their early albums, we probably would not have be listening to Supertramp today if it wasn't for this benefactor. So this album was the first of 3 Supertramp albums that achieved significant success. After this album was a not-so-popular album called Crisis What Crisis, but that was quickly followed up with an album Even in the Quietest Moments, and then ultimately their biggest success, which was Breakfast in America. These became huge records, each with growing sales. An album, Famous Last Words, followed, but a drop-off of appeal had really begun to show with that album, and a series of albums followed that never returned to the level of success of this great trio of records, Crime of the Century, Even in the Quietest Moments, and Breakfast in America. Looking back, the band itself looked at this first album of that trio, Crime of the Century, as a standout. Both Hodgson and Davies, the key writers and creators of the band, looked at this as a time when the band had a very high level of communication, and other members thought that this was the album where they hit their artistic peak. Although the band doesn't acknowledge any common theme or concept for the album, I certainly hear some clear storylines that occur in the album, especially on the first side, which we're going to talk about today.
Crime of the Century is a great album, and I believe it's the best of the 3 albums that you've pointed out. I wasn't aware of Supertramp at the time that the album was released. I didn't really start, we didn't really start to listen to music until another year or two later, 75, 76 was when we first started to buy albums. I recall when Even in the Quietest Moments came out and whatnot, but and certainly Breakfast in America was a massive hit when we were in high school. But I agree that Crime of the Century is the better of the 3 albums, and I think it's just a good album. It's a great album, generally speaking, as well. And at that time in the early 70s, kind of after Yes flew up its own ass with Tales of Topographic Oceans, bands like Supertramp and Genesis sort of kind of filled that art rock void, and when Peter Gabriel was still in Genesis, albums like Selling England by the Pound and Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which were very good albums, but Supertramp was a more accessible type of music. The songs were more accessible, and whatnot, and the Crime of the Century album is a good example of that. I think it's a great album.
And I'd agree. Kind of it wasn't the first Supertramp album that I or we listened to in as we really began to ramp up in our music listening years. Breakfast in America became a very popular album, and then beginning to listen to some of their older material began to fill in. So it wasn't the first Supertramp that I heard, but I'd agree it's my favorite Supertramp album, which is one of the reasons that I wanted to focus on it here. And although I think both sides are very good, the first side really rings as a very strong side for a record from start to finish. So let's take a look at Crime of the Century side one. I think it's a great side, and by that I mean it's not buffered with a bunch of songs or throwaway type tunes that you're looking to skip by while you're waiting for the next song. Each song stands on their own, and they're excellent songs and unique songs, different from each other. Now I hear a very clear story going through these songs, progressing from the first track to the fourth at the end, taking us through a life from childhood and on to finally to the last chapter of life and all the major stages in between. It begins with the song School. This song starts with a long, kind of slow harmonica intro, some quiet Hodgson's vocals, and then a slowly strumming guitar before the song really kicks in. But not before the first kind of slant or sharp corner that the album takes us on. In the background, right as the song is starting to kick in, we hear children playing, most certainly in a school playground. And just as the band kicks in, there's a rather loud child's scream that at first thought, because of the children playing in the background, it seems kind of playful. But after it has resonated, it really comes through as much more like a scream of fear, which is quite spooky. And it actually takes us into this track with that feeling. The song speaks about school as a very impersonal machine designed to produce people that are just like their parents. These parents help and enable the system by keeping kids away from what they shouldn't be exposed to, which in a lot of cases, looking back, are some of the things that are really important to learn about what life is really all about. It's seen through the eyes of an adult, it appears, speaking to a child, and that speaker doesn't know if they should be warning the child, asking them to fight back, or just resign themselves to the system. You're coming along, which is the lyric at the very end of the song, feels to me like a surrender, that the adult has surrendered to this system, and that is likely what is going to happen to the child as they move forward. Hodgson stated that the song is basically that they teach us in schools is all very fine, but it's what they don't teach us in schools that creates so much confusion in our being. This is a quote: "They don't really prepare us for life in terms of teaching us who we are inside. They teach us how to function on the outside and to be very intellectual, but they don't tell us how to act with our intuition or our heart, or really give us a real plausible explanation of what life's about." Really kind of and you feel that in the song. There's a back and forth in the singer about possibilities and opportunity, but at the same time, those that what just isn't to be and what is really coming out of the system. There's a beat that's trying to push the song along, but there's also a sense that it drags, just like someone who is unsuccessfully trying to push their way through the established school system. And just as growing children move into young adulthood, this song passes us into the rest of this album. The second track is Bloody Well Right. It appeared as the B-side on the single Dreamer in 1974. Listeners in the United States actually preferred the B-side to the A-side, and Bloody Well Right became their breakthrough hit in the United States, peaking at number 35 on the Billboard Top 100. It was regarded by Billboard reviewers as Supertramp's second best song, calling it an angry indictment of British economic caste systems, couched with hard rock, jazz, and music hall references. Myself, I didn't really hear it as angry, but more sarcastic, I guess I would say. Again, I've always felt Supertramp is predominantly sad, not mad. The crowd shouts right as if to support the status quo, followed by a quieter right from the singer, sarcastically more in a way of, yeah, whatever you say. Yeah, you're bloody well right. We see a young adult opening their eyes to the realities and discouragements of real life, the real power of money and family influence. The singer casts it aside with the vocals, me, I don't care anyway. A voice of authority suggests you can file a complaint if you'd like, but don't expect anything, and, oh, by the way, get back to work. As we hear in the lyrics, in the meantime, shut your face. The message is, all these complaints you have swirling in your head, they're right, but it doesn't matter. Get back to work. And that is really the feeling of this song. It moves along at a methodical pace, like step after step, day after day, week after week of working life. And it's also as much guitar as you're going to hear in any Supertramp song.
And just to touch on that point, Mark, you mentioned earlier that Dreamer was the A side, and Bloody Well Right was the B side. I agree that it's the most guitar oriented, or at least the sort of rock guitar that you're going to hear from Supertramp. And I think that the reason why it might have been more popular is that the kind of AOR album-oriented rock audience, I think, found it more appealing. Dreamer is more of a straight pop song,
yes,
and it's a little artier and maybe a little more stretched out than like just a regular pop hit. But there's some grit, there's some bottom end to Bloody Well Right that I think resonated better with the or struck a chord better with the AOR audience in the United States.
I would agree, and at the same time, it demonstrated, much like what I hear as the storyline of this entire track. It's depicting a time, a young adult time in life, when people have the most energy, when people have the most grit, when people are the loudest, when people are, it's the most up and going and moving part of that. And we switch gears as we move into the third track of the song, which is Hide in Your Shell. This was a Roger Hodgson song. In his own words, he was 23 when he wrote the song, confused about life, and like a lot of people at that age, trying to hide from their insecurities. And so that's what he was talking about. Myself, though, I see this more as a as a. Hang on a second. Okay. Myself, I hear this song as not so much from a young adult, but as a man entering middle age who proceeds to shed friends and a lot of their out-of-home activities and retreat to their version of a man cave or inside their own castle to spend more time alone for a lot of reasons. Just the loss of the charm of going out every evening, and being a little tired of people and battered by life that comes as you start to get towards the end of a career as opposed to the beginning. So it really resonates with me, the notion of withdrawal from a lot of the hustle and bustle that was life that comes this. And I sense this myself. There is a transition completing when you get to my age, from the young adult days when you're very focused on getting out and having fun and progressing yourself forward, to a point when you reach a much more solitary lifestyle. And they're meant to pursue their interests of men, to pursue their joys and interests at home. I look back to when we were in college. I mean, we had a pretty large group of friends that we saw and spent time with consistently. And that group would change a little bit, but it would primarily grow. We wanted to grow the circle, have more people that we spend a lot of time with consistently. Now I have to look at my life, and I can count my friends on my hand as far as my good friends. And quite frankly, some of those are family. It's just the way that, and I am not alone. I see this with a lot of the people that are my same age, and I saw it when I was younger with what was happening to my parents and parents of my friends. So I think it's a common thing that we see, and however you want to describe it or justify it, it is a withdrawal of some type into ourselves.
The that interpretation works on the one hand, but I also think that it applies to the sort of younger person who is maybe having trouble meshing with the world, kind of not unlike Simon and Garfunkel, "I Am a Rock," where this person's been hurt. If I'd never loved, I never would have cried, kind of thing, and sort of is the goodbye cruel world kind of thing at a young age. I'm just going to stick my books and my poetry to protect me. I also think that the song can be heard in that context as well. I mean, and that's one of the reasons why it's a good song, is because it's got some breadth in terms of how it can be interpreted by different people's, the listener's own experiences at the time that they're listening to music.
I agree that that is a very fair point of view that the song is getting through as well. And clearly, I mean, the writer wrote the song when they were in their young 20s, so that resonated well with them. There's also a very strong aspect in the lyrics that comes through a couple times about the person that the speaker or the singer loves. There's a love that they want to help, that they want to connect with, that's very important with them. And for a young adult, that can be that person that they'd like to reach out to and become connected to, but they're struggling with because they're hiding in this shell. From myself, I see as farther on in life, I see that as the people that are already connected to me. My wife, in my case, that although I do want to spend more and more time pursuing my own interests, and sometimes that's without anybody else, that connection to my wife is very important. Very important. And if I can help her to get to where she wants to be, is an important part of, me continuing that human desire for connection and connectivity and activity with others, even though I'm experiencing this withdrawal. So I'd absolutely agree that that point of view from a young person that is struggling to create or maintain those connections absolutely aligns. I just looking at the progression, that's kind of how I, for some time, especially through the experiences that I've had, am choosing to look at it. Okay, so we'll continue from Hiding Your Shell to the final track of the side. This withdrawal continues from society and ultimately into one's own head in the final chapters of life. Asylum tells a story much like many experience at the end of life. Fighting to not be forced into one's final home, locked away out of sight and mind, alone with their own thoughts. As often is the case in real life, the person involved does not necessarily feel the need for this type of care or this type of where they should be. But as also is often the case, they really do need to be there, as recognized by their family. They've got issues either because of their immobility or their mental stability to need to be somewhere else, to need to be in the asylum. The song, as it moves through the struggle inside one's head about not wanting to be swept away into an asylum, the song itself devolves into very kind of a certain level of craziness. There's some whoops and hollers and ultimately a quiet, peaceful piano run out. that takes us right to that final chapter of someone. Really, kind of an interesting and scary notion of the fact that this person has clearly lost control of where they're going to be. They're begging someone not to lock them away in the asylum, but we see towards the end that they're really struggling with the ability to stay in the real world.
And the given the work that I used to be engaged in, which was as a circuit court judge in Wisconsin, this song is something that I've thought about without having to listen to it, because there were a number of things that I needed to do as part of my work, which was to make decisions as to whether someone should either be involuntarily committed as a result of mental illness, or and also what is called in the state of Wisconsin protectively placed, meaning a court order that they live somewhere besides their home, which usually meant a nursing home, and just that the sort of the anguish of the vocalist singing, "Please don't arrange to have me sent to no asylum." I mean, I've seen that in people's faces, in their eyes, in my work, and they're most of the time when these matters were brought by the government, it was justified, and so I arranged to have them sent to the asylum, or I the one that signed off on it is maybe the better way to put it, and it's the loss of autonomy that comes with whether it's old age or mental infirmity of one kind or another. It's real, and the person usually does not realize, I'm just as sane as anyone, and so for me, it strikes a real chord in actual experiences that I've had with people who I had to say, "You are going to the asylum," and just the so there's some insight into that whole thing that is really kind of striking, coming from some relatively young people who created the song back in 1974.
And you really, they do it in a way that makes you feel that sense. There is a very sad begging, to not be locked away, and then it begins to move more into, as we get inside the person's head. They did a very good job with it, and it's a great end to the album. If you don't have the record, you can go to Spotify to listen to tracks 1 through 4 of it. You can get a sense of that side. It pairs well with kicking back to clear your mind after a tough day, or background music as you're doing things around the house. And it's a wonderful 23 minutes that you can spend listening to these 4 songs as they progress from school through early life in Bloody Well Right, to hiding in your shell, and ultimately begging not to be sent to an asylum at the end of the song. And that is Crime of the Century by Supertramp, Side 1.